talk about.
Okay.
You're not talking. and then the most important thing, talk when you're talking.
The Committee on Science, Space, and Technology will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recesses of the committee at any time. Good morning and welcome to today's hearing entitled U.S. Fire Administration and Fire Grant Programs Reauthorization, Examining Effectiveness and Priorities. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. The purpose of today's hearing is to review the United States Fire Administration and the Assistance to Firefighters, FIRE, and Staffing for Adequate Fire and Emergency Response, SAFER, grant programs. The hearing will help inform legislation to address current program authorizations that expire on September 30th, 2017. Fire prevention and safety is literally a matter of life and death. In 2015, there were 1.34 million fires reported in the United States, causing over 3,000 civilian deaths and over 15,000 injuries. In addition to this devastating human loss, fires caused $14.3 billion in property damages. As I travel throughout my district and visit with my firefighters and paramedics and first responders, I am constantly reminded of the sacrifices that these brave men and women make on a daily basis to protect their fellow citizens in our community. Last year, sadly, 69 of those brave men and women across the country lost their lives in the line of duty. Fire prevention has improved dramatically in the last 40 years since Congress passed the Federal Fire Prevention and Control Act in 1974, which created the U.S. Fire Administration and the National Fire Academy. But these numbers are still too high. USFA and NFA are tasked with data collection, public education, as well as research and training efforts to help to reduce fire deaths and make our communities and residents safer. We will hear from the acting administrator of the U.S. Fire Administration today about how the agency works to fulfill its mission and learn how we can enhance its efforts to improve fire safety in the U.S. Firefighting activities and funding are primarily the responsibility of states and local communities. However, for the last 15 years, the federal government has awarded competitive federal grants directly to local fire departments and unaffiliated emergency medical services organizations to help address a variety of equipment, training, and other fire-related and EMS needs. And oftentimes those are dealing with new technologies too that we want to make sure you have the best and the latest. Fire Act awards provide funding for equipment and training to ensure the safety of our nation's first responders. SAFER Act awards help departments address hiring, recruiting, and retaining firefighters to help maintain and increase the number of trained firefighters in local communities. I know that many professional and volunteer departments in my district rely on these grants so they can continue to provide high-quality fire and emergency services both to their communities, and I know in the instance of my community, they often are helping people throughout the country as well as internationally acclaimed. So a fine member of one of those departments is here today with us, Captain John Nemec. From the Fairfax County Fire and Rescue Department, I look forward to hearing his testimony on the needs of the firefighters in his department and around the country. We have a panel representing state and local fire departments and organizations from around the country, Washington State, Kansas, Louisiana, and Illinois. All have different needs, and I look forward to their input on how we can improve the fire safety in all communities and support our nation's first responders. Last month, the horrific Grenfell Tower fire in London that killed over 80 people reminded us we cannot take fire safety for granted. Closer to home, it was just 2 years ago that a metro fire injured 70 and killed a Virginia resident who was grandmother of 3. In each case, first responders ran towards the flames and prevented additional lives from being lost. I look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to move this timely legislation to ensure our nation's firefighters and paramedics have the tools they need to fight and prevent fire. And with that, I look forward to hearing the testimony of our witnesses. And I now recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Lipinski, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman Comstock. The authorizations of the U.S. Fire Administration Assistance to Firefighters Grant, or AFG program, as well as the Staffing for Adequate Fire and Emergency Response, or SAFER grant program, expire in just 2 months. Without congressional action, both programs will terminate on January 2nd, 2018, under sunset provisions included in the last reauthorization. I hope this committee will work to get a bill to the President's desk before that time to reauthorize these programs. I want to thank our distinguished panelists for being here today and for their service in keeping the American public safe from fire and from other hazardous threats. In the early 1990s, fires claimed 12,000 American lives per year and caused $11 billion in damage, making the U.S. the leader of all major industrialized countries in per capita deaths and property loss from fire. A 1973 report by the National Commission on Fire Prevention and Control, titled America Burning, recommended the establishment of the U.S. Fire Administration and the National Fire Academy. Thanks in large part to the efforts of those institutions and all of our first responders, the nation is making progress in lowering fire fatalities. Today's rate of just over 3,000 civilian fire deaths per year is significantly lower than in the 1970s, but is still one of the highest in the industrialized world. Unfortunately, it will be difficult to reduce fire fatalities and property loss without adequate funding of the Fire Administration and fire grant programs. While appropriated funding levels have remained somewhat flat for the last few years, these levels are well below program authorizations. Critical areas such as firefighter safety, fire protection, and fire data collection analysis, all of which assist fire service professionals in the field and help keep communities safe, are underfunded. Career, volunteer, and combination fire departments all face challenges in meeting their day-to-day needs. Local fire departments are the boots on the ground for fire prevention and protection. But when state budgets do not allow for adequate funding to hire firefighters and ensure proper training and access to life-saving protective gear and equipment, there is a federal role in providing funding and technical assistance. The Fire Grants Reauthorization Act of 2012 made significant changes to the fire grant programs to address some of these funding and technical obstacles. Changes included the distribution of AFG fire funding among the various types of fire departments, reducing the cost share requirement for small departments, and waiving the matching requirements for less affluent communities. Whether in a booming local economy or a struggling one, many of today's fire departments do more than fight fire. They respond to medical calls, hazardous material calls, and calls about other hazardous situations such as active shooter. It is critical that the more than 1 million firefighters across the nation have access to proper training to protect the public and themselves while doing a very tough job. The National Fire Academy curriculum reflects current firefighter duties to help fire and emergency professionals prepare for all hazards responses. Achieving successful outcomes in all hazards responses often requires the use of advanced firefighting technologies. Federal agencies, including the Department of Homeland Security, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and the National Science Foundation, along with the university research community, are investing in fire-related research, including first responder protective equipment, health and safety monitoring of emergency responders, and smart information and communications technologies for real-time situational awareness. I look forward to Dr. Horn's testimony on how these technologies help firefighters and what research needs and capability gaps require further investment. I look forward to hearing our panel discuss the effects of these changes and others to the fire service community and what the committee should consider as we look at reauthorizing these programs. Thank you for taking the time to appear before us today. Chairwoman Comstock, before I yield back, I want to ask unanimous consent to introduce into the record a letter from the Property Casualty Insurance Association of America in support of the Safer Grants Program.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And the last few seconds, I just want to say I was just in my district on Monday with the LaGrange Fire Department, and they just had been awarded a grant, and they're telling me about how important that these grants are for assuring community safety. And again, I want to thank everyone who is here today, and thank you for your service to our country and all of our communities. I yield back.
Thank you, and I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee for a statement, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Comstock. Thank you for holding this hearing today. As the committee considers reauthorization, it is helpful to examine the effectiveness and priorities of the U.S. Fire Administration, the Assistance to Firefighters Grant Program, and the Staffing for Adequate Fire and Emergency Response Grant Program. I want to welcome all of our witnesses, and I appreciate them being here to share insights today. I'm pleased to announce that earlier this year, the city of Duncanville in my district received a grant. As with other grant recipients, the award will help the Duncanville Fire Department in its efforts to protect the health and safety of the public and emergency response personnel. The availability of these funds is critical to many communities. Local fire departments respond to a myriad of hazards, from structural fires and automobile accidents to wildfires and other natural disasters, and even terroristic attacks. Faring better than any other programs, the U.S. Fire Administration and the Fire Grants Program would remain flat funded under this administration's fiscal year 2018 budget proposal. However, the budget requests and the recent appropriations for these programs have fallen well below the authorized levels. In addition to providing fewer resources for training, purchasing life-saving equipment, and hiring enough firefighters to respond safely to emergencies, underfunding also affects Congress's ability to conduct oversight of these programs. When the agencies do not have proper funding to carry out the required studies and reports, we lack the data and feedback on the effectiveness of the programs. So I urge this committee to continue to support authorization levels that acknowledge the significant demand for these important programs. This hearing is also an opportunity for us to review changes made to the programs since the last authorization. In 2016, GAO reported that FEMA has incorporated a majority of the changes that Congress required in 2012. However, GAO also recommended greater coordination between the Fire Administration and FEMA, as well as the establishment of clearer performance metrics for the grant proposal. The agencies still have to work to meet those recommendations. Coordination and collaboration among relevant agencies is key. For example, while wildfires are handled by the U.S. Forest Service, wildfires often approach and even hit populated areas. And I'm interested in hearing more about the collaboration between federal agencies, state, tribal, and local jurisdictions in addressing wildlands-urban interface fires. Finally, the fire service community relies on advances in fire-related scientific research and technological innovation, including communications technologies, protective gear and equipment, and firefighting tactics. I hope Dr. O'Neill and Dr. Horn, you will provide us with an update on fire-related research needs and any technology gaps that need addressing, as well as federal agency collaborations and university partnerships. The U.S. Fire Administration and the Fire Grants Program provide critical resources to address the nation's emergency response challenges. And I look forward to hearing from our witnesses and how Congress can ensure they have the support they need to assist the departments effectively across the nation. It is an important role that you play, and I hope to hear from you today. Thank you, and I yield back.
We will introduce our witnesses. Our first witness today is Dr. Dennis O'Neill, Acting Administrator of the U.S. Fire Administration. He joined the Jersey City Fire Department in 1971 and rose through the ranks from firefighter to deputy chief, then acting chief in 1995, leading a uniformed force of 620 firefighters and officers. He was appointed superintendent of the National Fire Academy in 1995. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree from the New Jersey City University, a master's degree in public administration from Fairleigh Dickinson University, and a Doctor of Education degree from NYU. He taught in the master and doctorate programs in education at NYU for 5 years and has written numerous articles in the fire field. Our second witness today is Chief John Sinclair, President and Chair of the Board for the International Association of Fire Chiefs. He also serves as Fire Chief of the Kittitas Valley Fire, did I get that right? And Rescue in Washington State. Prior to this position, Chief Sinclair served on the Emergency Medical Services section, where he was involved with major issues facing fire-based EMS. He currently represents the fire service on the National EMS Advisory Council. He has also worked with the American College of Surgeons, Hartford Consensus 1 and 2, as well as assisted with Department of Homeland Security and Centers for Disease Control with their Bystander Response Project. Our third witness today is Captain John Nemec, President of the Fairfax County, Virginia Professional Firefighters and Paramedics International Association of Firefighters. He is a 22-year veteran of the Fairfax County Fire and Rescue Department. He also serves as an executive board member of the National Conference on Public Employee Retirement Systems, the largest trade association dedicated to nonprofit public pension advocating. He earned his bachelor's degree in occupational safety and health from the National Labor College, as well as a certificate of completion from the George Washington University's EMT paramedic program. I now recognize Dr. Marshall to introduce our next witness.
Thank you, Chairwoman Comstock. I'm very honored to introduce our fourth witness today, Mr. Steve Hirsch. Steve is the first chair of the National Volunteer Fire Council and a resident of the largest agriculture-producing district in the country, the 1st District of Kansas. Steve served as the training officer for Sheridan County, Thomas County, and the Grinnell Fire Department of Kansas, and that's about 2,000 square miles, as I remember, having just been out there this past week doing some town halls. These are all 100% volunteer fire departments. Mr. Hirsch has served as the secretary of the Kansas State Firefighters Association since 2000, and also serves as the county attorney for Decatur County. He's a graduate of one of the finest institutions in the land, Kansas State University, as well as Washburn Law School. I want to recognize his wife, Anita, who's in the audience as well, and I'm very proud that I've delivered a couple of Anita's, I think they're both boys, weren't they nephews? Or was it one of each? One of each, okay. So it's been 20 years ago, but there was one of each. So very proud that she's here and certainly understand what a sacrifice it is to let your husband go play these games. He's got to do all these weekend chores. My dad was in charge of the fire department in my hometown and trained many weekends with him, training volunteers as well. And I hate to admit this, Steve, but I had to call on some of your friends' help one hot summer afternoon when I had a little prairie fire get out of control, and they sure saved my bacon. So appreciate what you do. And of course, we just had 650,000 acres of wildfire in Kansas that destroyed over 5,000 head of cattle. So certainly saved hundreds of lives with that fire, and appreciate all that you guys do for us. Thanks.
Great. Now our fifth witness today is Dr. Gavin Horn, Research Program Director for the Illinois Fire Service Institute. His research interests lie in the areas of firefighter health and safety research, first responder technology development, material testing and design, and non-destructive evaluation. He is a member of the Board of Trustees for the Fire Protection Research Foundation and currently serves as a firefighter and engineer with the Savoy Fire Department in Illinois. He received his PhD in mechanical engineering from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Our sixth witness today is Chief Butch Browning, President of the National Association of State Fire Marshals, as well as the Louisiana State Fire Marshal. Over the past 7 years, he has led the reorganization of the State Fire Marshal's office to include cross-training of personnel and the development of a modern data management system. Over the past 29 years, he has served at all levels of the fire service. He entered public service as a sheriff's deputy for East Baton Rouge Parish and later served as fire chief for the District 6 Fire Department in Baton Rouge and for the city of Gonzales. He is a graduate of the National Fire Academy's Executive Fire Office program and is a nationally registered emergency medical technician. I now recognize Dr. O'Neill for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Dennis O'Neill. I serve as the Acting United States Fire Administrator responsible for managing the USFA, our programs, training, and facilities at the National Emergency Training Center. And I'm pleased to talk to you this morning about the USFA. In a sentence, the USFA works to prevent local emergencies from becoming national disasters. And to the extent that a community has a well-trained, well-led cadre of responders, that emergency stays local. Poorly handled, or so large the local forces are overwhelmed, local emergencies become disasters, triggering state and federal response, assets, and costs. Sometimes the emergency is of such initial magnitude that the local responders are overwhelmed. And when that happens, it's important that the local forces integrate with state and local agencies under the National Incident Management System. Poorly prepared, local forces won't integrate well, resulting in increased loss of life and property, increased costs, and often criticism of federal response. The USFA supports the DHS and FEMA missions in 4 ways. We train mid to senior level fire officers and specialists. We collect and analyze incident data and provide information about the 25 million fire department responses a year. We develop and distribute model fire prevention and public education programs, and we assist in research. There are several disturbing factors that I see affecting our nation and citizens over the next few decades. First, as you all pointed out, Americans are dying in fires, a little over 3,000 a year. And we work closely with all affected governments and groups to encourage the installation of sprinklers and smoke alarms, conduct inspections, and practice drills. But the methods and materials of construction are changing rapidly. Today's modern fire home is a perfect storm of conditions and outcomes: larger floor areas, increased fuel loads, and new construction materials. These result in faster spread, shorter time to flashover, less time to escape, and more rapid collapse. Secondly, the baby boomers are hitting the local fire and emergency services response system. We have more than 30 years of data to show that senior citizens are the high-risk group for fires, the high-risk group for accidents, and the high-demand group for emergency medical services. The beginning of the boomers are turning 71 this past January, and the trailing end turning 53, and their life expectancy is 85 years. We anticipate 32 more years of high demand for emergency services by our most vulnerable population. Thirdly, the wildland fire issue, including the wildland-urban interface, where civilization meets the forest, is a growing problem. What once was seasonal is now perennial, beginning earlier and ending later each year. People are living in the WUI, and once a wildland fire starts within miles of their home, they're vulnerable. This is a nationwide issue, from the east in Florida and Tennessee to the west in Utah, Arizona, and California. Fourthly, fire departments are now an essential element in the response to active shooters. As a recent example, Chief Tammy Kea was the first arriving fire chief officer at the Dallas police shooting. She continues to publicly state that her success in managing the medical response was the training that she received at the National Fire Academy. To address these 4 concerns, the NFA provides cutting-edge education and training to America's estimated 1.3 million firefighters. Courses are delivered in classrooms at the National Emergency Training Center, in classrooms throughout the United States in cooperation with accredited state and local fire training agencies and colleges and universities. The NFA also has a robust system of online, instructor-mediated, and self-study courses. Our National Fire Data Center continues to modernize the National Fire Incident Reporting System browsing tool, along with other web tool applications, to improve the overall reliability, performance, ease of data entry, and administration by fire departments and state users. This modernization will allow users to access the NFIRS data warehouse to access, share, and compare data. Finally, Madam Chair, I want to thank you and the committee's generous gifts of time and interest, and I appreciate the opportunity to highlight the accomplishments of the Fire Administration and the hard work of our staff. Your continued support is instrumental as we work to make America fire safe. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. And I now recognize Chief Sinclair for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Good morning, Chairman Comstock, Ranking Member Lipinski, and members of the subcommittee. I am Chief John Sinclair, Fire Chief of the Kittitas Valley Fire and Rescue Department in Ellensburg, Washington. Today I testify as the President and Chairman of the Board of the International Association of Fire Chiefs. On behalf of the 12,000 members of the IFC, I thank you for the opportunity to discuss the effectiveness of the Assistance to Firefighters Grant Program, including the SAFER Grant Program, along with the U.S. Fire Administration. The role of America's Fire and Emergency Service continues to evolve to cover new missions such as EMS, hazmat, and terrorism response. The USFA and the AFG and SAFER Grant programs are important partners in helping the nation's Fire and Emergency Service meet this challenge. The AFG program was created by Congress in 2000 to help fire departments provide baseline emergency response for their communities. This FEMA program uses a highly respected, merit-based peer review process to evaluate grant applications and provide matching grants to local fire departments. The AFG program helps fire departments with equipment and training. The SAFER program helps fire departments meet staffing needs, and the Fire Prevention and Safety program supports fire prevention programs and research to promote firefighter and civilian fire safety. The AFG program has helped my department, using AFG grants, KVFR, purchase personal protective equipment and self-contained breathing apparatus for our firefighters. These purchases improved their safety and helped improve regional interoperability between local fire departments that eventually led to a merger, making a more effective and efficient response force. The SAFER grant program plays a vital role in helping local fire departments meet staffing needs. Besides providing matching grants for career firefighters, the SAFER grant program also provides grants for volunteer recruitment and retention. Approximately 70% of the nation's firefighters are volunteers. Nevertheless, fire departments face trouble recruiting and retaining volunteers who must balance firefighting and training requirements with job and family commitments. By partnering with state chiefs organizations in Virginia, Connecticut, and Tennessee, the IFC is working on SAFER-funded initiatives to help local fire departments recruit and retain volunteers. These programs include marketing campaigns and leadership training to help volunteer fire chiefs. I want to recognize Representative Esty for her assistance in a PSA helping with the Connecticut program. The Connecticut campaign led to 900 events, distributed 68,000 marketing materials, and resulted in 400 new volunteer firefighters. The Virginia campaign resulted in more than 1,100 applications in 15 participating departments with 656 new members that came in. I would also like to highlight the life-saving research funded by the Fire Prevention and Safety Grant Program. The IFC's F-STAR program translates the research funded by these grants into actionable information that affects tactics on the fire ground, fact sheets on fire dynamics, structural integrity, and firefighter health, help fire departments improve their operations. The F-STAR program has also produced guidance to help doctors provide rigorous physicals to firefighters to reduce the number of strokes, heart attacks, and injuries. Despite the effectiveness of the AFG and SAFER programs, many fire departments still need assistance meeting basic staffing, equipment, and training needs. We asked the subcommittee to reauthorize AFG and SAFER programs. In the Senate, the IFC endorsed Senate Bill 829. This legislation would authorize funding for the AFG and SAFER grant programs through FY 2023. Also, it would remove the January 2nd, 2018 sunset date that would eliminate the programs. In addition, S 829 would make technical and administrative changes to improve the program's efficiency and reduce waste, fraud, and abuse. I would also like to recognize Dr. O'Neill in the important role that U.S. Fire Administration plays. The National Fire Academy is the West Point or Quantico of the fire and emergency services. Using both in-person and online training, NFA educates tens of thousands of fire service leaders every year about how to adapt to emerging issues and lead their departments better. We congratulate the President for appointing Chief Keith Bryant as the U.S. Fire Administrator. I ask that the committee also reauthorize USFA this year. It is important that USFA continue to have dedicated funding. This funding should be used to continue to develop policy and guidance, revise curricula at the NFA, and maintain infrastructure and information technology. I also encourage the USFA to provide guidance to fire departments as they address behavioral health and wellness issues. I thank the committee for the opportunity to testify at today's hearing. The AFG and SAFER programs and the USFA are important partners in helping local fire departments address an evolving all-hazards mission. On behalf of the nation's fire chief, I look forward to working with the committee to reauthorize these critical programs. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I now recognize Captain Nemec for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Comstock, Ranking Member Lipinski, Yakshimush, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Good morning. My name is John Nemec, and I am the president of the Fairfax County Professional Firefighters and Paramedics. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today on behalf of the International Association of Firefighters and over 305,000 firefighters and emergency medical personnel who serve in every congressional district in this nation. I come before you today to offer my full support for the SAFER and FIRE grant programs and urge the subcommittee to reauthorize these programs. SAFER and FIRE grants have proven themselves to be highly effective, allowing local fire departments to make significant progress in their baseline capabilities. According to the 2015 needs assessment of the fire service by the National Fire Protection Association, SAFER and FIRE have helped local fire departments improve staffing, equipment, and training levels. For example, 2010 to 2015, the number of fire departments serving mid-sized cities meeting safe staffing standards have increased by 25%. Such studies also show significant improvements in certain categories of personal protective equipment and training. For example, departments of all sizes have improved the percentage of personnel with personal alert safety system or PASS devices. In 2001, only 38% of fire departments equipped all responders on a shift with their own PASS device, a necessity to find injured or lost firefighters in an emergency. This figure jumped to 72% in 2015, a result NFPA speculates due to fire grant funding. Thousands of communities, large and small, across this nation have been aided by the SAFER and FIRE grant programs, including my department, the Fairfax County Fire and Rescue Department. I have served the department for over 30 years and have seen firsthand the remarkable service delivery improvements we have achieved through both SAFER and FIRE. For example, Fairfax County received fire grants in 2015 and 2016 to provide training to 54 advanced life support providers, upgrading their emergency medical skills and certification. These awards exclusively allowed our department to upgrade all frontline responding units to the paramedic level, allowing the county to deliver high-quality EMS care in a more timely manner. Fairfax County has also benefited from SAFER grants, which allowed the county to hire an additional 49 firefighters, improving response capabilities by staffing all 14 ladder trucks with 4 personnel. This staffing level has allowed the county to reduce risk for the citizens, minimize property loss, and increase firefighter safety. I am proud of the progress Fairfax County has made with the help of SAFER and FIRE grants, and many communities across America can say the same. Yet, despite the progress made in communities large and small, the need for funding through the SAFER and FIRE grant program persists. Many fire departments continue struggling to meet appropriate staffing, training, and equipment standards. The 2015 NFPA needs assessment identified many of these weaknesses. For example, 49 of all departments have failed to formally train all of their personnel involved in structural firefighting. 50% of departments operate without enough portable radios to equip all emergency responders on a shift. And 53% of departments could not equip all firefighters with self-contained breathing apparatus. As you know, work has begun in the Senate to reauthorize these critical grant programs. Recently, the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee unanimously approved Senate Bill 829, the AFG and SAFER Program Reauthorization Act of 2017. The bill is a simple reauthorization of SAFER and FIRE. It makes several minor but necessary technical corrections and eliminates a sunset provision on the programs. The IAFF and all major national fire service organizations have worked collectively with the senators for many months to help craft this bill and have offered it our enthusiastic endorsement. We believe SAFER and FIRE have been refined over the many years the programs have been in place. The grants are working effectively and efficiently, and we do not recommend making major changes to the programs. As you well know, Safer and Fire's current authorization expires on September 30th of this year, and the programs are due to sunset on January 2nd, 2018. Therefore, I strongly encourage the subcommittee to move swiftly to reauthorize Safer and Fire to reinsure the continuance without interruption. Again, I'd like to thank the subcommittee for the opportunity to testify today, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
And we now recognize Mr. Hirsch for his testimony.
Thank you. My name is Steve Hirsch. I'm first vice chair of the National Volunteer Fire Council, which represents the interest of the nation's more than 1 million volunteer fire, EMS, and rescue personnel. I'd like to thank the subcommittee, and especially my own Congressman, Dr. Marshall, for inviting me here to testify today about the need to reauthorize AFG and SAFER, as well as the U.S. Fire Administration. I want to begin by highlighting the critical need for Congress to reauthorize AFG and SAFER prior to January 2nd. As the committee is aware, there's a provision in the current law that eliminates those programs if they're not reauthorized before that date. This would be a severe blow to the nation's fire service and would put thousands of communities across the country at risk. If you take only one thing away from my testimony, it should be the need to move quickly to reauthorize those programs. My own Sheridan County Fire Department's been fortunate to receive grants for protective gear and hose, to replace a fire truck that was 50 years old, to buy a compressor to refill our air tanks without having to make a 60-mile round trip, for heavy-duty washing machines to keep our gear clean and eliminate carcinogens. Our neighboring departments use our washing machine and compressor, so the value of the program goes well beyond the benefit to our own department. I spend a lot of time teaching in all volunteer fire departments across Kansas at least once a month, and I can tell you firsthand there's an overwhelming amount of need. Those are small towns with very small tax bases. How can a department with an annual budget of $10,000 ever hope to replace bunker gear at $3,000 a person? How can they hope to buy a new brush rig to fight wildfires? Well, they have that hope because of the AFG program. Recently, I called the widow of a firefighter in my community who died in the line of duty in 1967. The department at that time had no gear and no formal training. Carol Ferguson was killed when a chimney fell on him as he was fighting a fire at a rural house in the county. The impact of that death continues to reverberate in our community 50 years later. Firefighters risk their lives every time they respond to a call, and the AFG program helps to minimize that danger by helping departments buy equipment and get training that they would otherwise not be able to afford. The NVFC strongly opposes changes in the authorization that would divert money away from the AFG program or from local fire departments. The competition for this funding is very intense. There are a lot of departments that are applying that are not being funded, and a lot of need that's not being met. Any shift and changes out of the AFG program would only make things worse. The SAFER program helps to increase or maintain the number of firefighters in the U.S. 10% of the SAFER funds go to recruit and retain volunteers. These help departments create marketing plans to recruit new volunteers and establish benefit programs and have other retention strategies to keep volunteers in the department. The volunteer fire service is changing because the country is changing, and that's why the SAFER program is critical. The traditional staffing model where children live and work in the same community where they grew up and follow their parents into the volunteer fire service is changing. Young folks are more mobile. Folks are moving out of rural communities to find work and commuting longer distances to and from work. There are more households in which both adults in the home have jobs, and of course that disrupts the ability of the volunteer fire department to staff. We can't just sit back and wait for volunteers to come walking through our door. The SAFER gives local departments the tools to go out in the community and recruit folks to become volunteer firefighters. Our organization is also not seeking any major changes to the AFG or SAFER programs in the reauthorization. There are relative minor changes that we're seeking that are outlined in my written testimony. Finally, the U.S. Fire Administration provides training to more than 100,000 fire and emergency service personnel each year. The USFA also performs research and collects data specific to the fire service and educates the public on the importance of fire safety. It is our organization's belief that the U.S. Fire Administration does a great job given the resources available to them, and we're not seeking any changes to the current authorization. If you'll indulge me just a little bit, for this farm boy volunteer firefighter from western Kansas, when you work this bill, when you talk with your colleagues, when you vote, I would implore you, in fact, I would beg you, to think about Carol Ferguson. who left his job at the meat counter of the local grocery store in June of 1967, never returning home. How much difference these programs could have made in that family's life had they had proper equipment and good training. And that's why these programs are so important. Even more so, I want you to think about who the person in that family who was the real hero, his widow, Marie, who was left without a husband and 3 very small children who didn't have a daddy any longer. These grant programs are helping keep volunteer firefighters alive, without any doubt in my mind. Those are firefighters who don't get a paycheck. They do it because they love their fellow man. So thank you for your past support. Thank you for listening to me. And thank you for helping keep our firefighters alive by supporting these programs.
Chairman Comstock, Ranking Member Lipinski, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to participate in this important hearing. As part of the larger discussion, I would like to focus my comments specifically on the American research enterprise that is supporting the fire safety of the nation through a component of the AFG grants, specifically the Fire Prevention Safety Grant Program. Between FY 2011 and FY 2015, a little over $170 million has been awarded from the Fire Prevention Safety Program, approximately $33 million of which has been devoted to the research and development activities, which I'll refer to as R&D. A little over $6.5 million and 6 projects per year have been supported between FY11 and FY15, a significant reduction from the FY06 to FY10, where an average of nearly $10 million was awarded for over 11 projects per year. While a relatively small component of the overall AFG program, the fire prevention safety R&D activities are unique in that they support national programs, which strengthen local fire departments' ability to utilize the larger AFG and SAFER programs. Indeed, this is the only national funding program specifically devoted to enhancing the health, safety, and effectiveness of firefighters through projects such as the one that you'll see in the video screen that's going to play behind me. The Fire Service is in desperate need of federal funding to advance research projects that support evidence-based policies to address long-standing issues in this dangerous occupation. At the same time, the risks, the hazards are evolving as the Fire Service responds to new operational realities and new operational missions. A variety of organizations and stakeholders developed a series of needs analysis and research agenda to support fire departments in the face of this changing risk profile. Documents such as Project Responder and Interagency Board Priority List, along with firefighter-centric needs analysis produced by stakeholders and partners, the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation, the Fire Protection Research Foundation, in addition to specific work by NIST on their research roadmap for smart firefighting and NFPA's United States Fire Service needs analysis, provide important snapshots of the American Fire Service, which I'll review in my written testimony. However, these documents are importantly reviewed very regularly and updated by the Fire Service stakeholders themselves, often with the research community. In each funding cycle for the fire prevention safety grants, they provide invaluable support as the voice of the Fire Service to guide investments made by the AFG in this area. Stated bluntly, the Fire Prevention Safety R&D Grant Program is absolutely vital for a broad-based, action-oriented federal research program focused on the needs of the fire community, one that provides incredibly high impact for fire departments across the country with relatively small investment. Largely due to the recent fire prevention safety-supported research projects, significant advancements have had a direct and profound impact on the fire service. Our understanding of the hazards associated with structural firefighting, the need for appropriate staffing levels, effective and efficient tactics, and the cardiovascular risks associated with firefighting have all had dramatically increased understanding due to the focused research support by this R&D program. But we must continue to be evaluated as our landscape continues to evolve. Our understanding of the chemical and toxic exposure that firefighters face is beginning to come into focus, and our understanding of the post-traumatic stress impact is just now developing. And risks from outside the traditional response theater, including violent incidents and changing calls related to the drugs, are driving demand for changes in protection beyond the traditional thermal considerations. And the world around us begins to embrace smart technologies and the Internet of Things. We too are learning how to leverage this cyber-physical infrastructure to improve our capabilities and our effectiveness. And impacting these areas, the R&D program has had significant broader impacts. It's driven an increase in the scientific literature focused on the firefighter themselves. Dr. Sarah Janke from the National Development Research Institute did an analysis and showed that almost 70% of all articles that are referenced on the PubMed index with the term firefighter come from after the advent of R&D funding over the past 10 years, 70%. Changes in the way academic researchers interact with the fire service have driven a drastic improvement in the research to practice protocol. As a result, there are specific and focused efforts that have influenced a wide range of standards and policies across the country, from PPE manufacturing to fireground tactics to health and safety practices to purchasing decisions. Research is impacting practice. And this research has included broader impacts well beyond the fire service, adding to the state of science in many disciplines that support the fire service. So while the Fire Prevention Safety Program has been successful in supporting the evolving needs of the fire service, there are some important opportunities that could lead to even greater reach of this program, which I detail in my written testimony. But a couple important points. Considering the high benefit to cost ratio, it would be appropriate to restore funding and award rates to the levels at FY06 to FY10 at a very minimum. It is also important to look at different funding mechanisms, providing for longer duration funding mechanisms, which would allow longitudinal projects, such as a 5-year plus potential for 5 more years of renewal, would allow research to use the strongest research design available, which will allow even greater scientific rigor and further increase the credibility of the program. There's been discussion for years of funding centers of excellence through the Fire Prevention and Safety Program, and there's now a broad-based transdisciplinary group that can support that work and benefit from that. It's also important to continue to fund and increase the visibility for exploratory projects that can help lead the fire service's understanding of some of the risks that we face on the fire ground. In summary, the Fire Prevention Safety Grant, and particularly the R&D program, is a relatively small component of the AFG activity, but it has a broad national impact. It informs a conversation held by many of the fire service organizations sitting here. It supports fire service local departments by empowering improved purchasing decisions through the AFG grant program, better understanding of manpower requirements through SAFER, and informed development of local policies, procedures, and practices based on the best science available. Thank you very much for the opportunity to welcome any questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you. And I now recognize Chief Browning for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. It's indeed an honor to be here. I'm Butch Browning. I'm the Louisiana State Fire Marshal. I'm currently president of the National Association of State Fire Marshals. Over my left shoulder is the Virginia State Fire Marshal, Brian McGraw. I appreciate his attendance and support here today. The National Association of State Fire Marshals represents the senior state officials in every state. So it's a small group of 50 people who work very hard in their states to support their local fire departments, primarily drive fire prevention programs, fire investigation programs, and data programs. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. We want to make no doubt about it. The National Association of State Fire Marshals fully support the reauthorization of the AFG, the SAFER, and the Fire Prevention and Safety grants. In addition, as a personal product of the National Fire Academy, I'll tell you it is the West Point or any other higher, most prestigious institution you could think of. What it does for our state and the people who go to that who have no opportunities in many cases to get leadership training is just phenomenal. And I certainly appreciate what they've done to my life. And you know, I just come before you as an old Louisiana boy, South Louisiana boy, not North Louisiana, and your temperatures here remind me of being home. But I've just got to tell you, people are alive today, firefighters and citizens, in part to this entire grant program. And the gentlemen who are sitting up here today have seen many circumstances of death and loss. And, you know, what I encourage you to do, and I think you're doing that, I encourage you to look into the eyes of your firefighters in your districts, because you will hear real stories of domestic defenders, and I appreciate that. At 14 years old, I got involved in the volunteer fire service and found it to be my passion, moved up the ranks, became a fire chief. About 6 months before Hurricane Katrina, we had an AFG grant in the hopper for interoperability, which we didn't have those radios when Katrina came. We were awarded those radios months after, and our department was then ready to handle disasters. And those radios would have never been purchased had it not been for the AFG program. The staffing of firefighters across this country, it's phenomenal. We have to keep those things up. And of course, the fire prevention and safety. But what I didn't tell you about me is what got me into this business. When I was 3 years old, I was significantly burned in a fire. My dad subsequently joined the volunteer fire department and put me in the position that I'm in today. The story is what caused my fire was prior to codes and standards when water heaters were not 18 inches off the ground. Today they are. So I'll tell you, fire prevention and safety have saved many children's lives. And I certainly respect that and appreciate that. I come before you today representing the National Fire Marshals, asking that we change the percentage that goes to fire prevention and safety. See, we believe that we need to move some funds from the open competition. We need to move 8% into fire prevention and safety to not only get more fire prevention and safety, but to provide statewide support to what we do. You know, in the state of Louisiana, we had an Operation Save a Life program, and we've installed almost 35,000 smoke alarms across the state. In its first year, 12 people's lives were saved. These alarms were installed by small, large, and medium fire departments across this state, so we know it works. We know that saving lives is important. We know that fire prevention, safety, and data. We know that fire suppression forces, and we know that fire investigation and analysis is the way for us to protect the American fire problem. I'm going to leave you because I want to be brief, and it's kind of on the heels of Mr. Hirsch's story of Mr. Ferguson, who paid the ultimate sacrifice. This past Sunday, I had to give the eulogy to yet another Louisiana firefighter who gave their lives serving their community. A firefighter who was responding to a structure fire, and the firefighter didn't make it, was involved in a horrific accident in the fire apparatus. And I had to look into the eyes of that family. And what I'll tell you that family's telling you today is that we need more equipment. We need more firefighters. We need more prevention and safety. Those three things working together will go a long way in reducing America's fire problem. And we can rewind to America burning. We can rewind to before we had some of the fire prevention programs and before we had some of the better training for firefighters and see that we've made some great headway. This investment works. So I come to you in partnership, I come to you in thanks, and I look forward to this process.
Thank you. Great. And I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. As a longtime resident of Fairfax County, I recognize that, I've had some of the concerns that you identified on structures and hazardous materials and all the things that we need to be dealing with, and that's why I'm very interested in the Firefighter Cancer Registry Act that we've worked on together, and thank you for your efforts on highlighting that issue. How are we able to use technology both in that area as well as some of these other areas? Like, for example, when you're going into a structure, like what technologies do we have now that might help to better identify where we're going in, keeping in touch with everyone? You mentioned the pass devices that will help, but also things like some of the technology we're using to develop lighter materials that people will have on to protect themselves, as well as lighter and more refined and better materials for breathing apparatus, so that you'll be both protected but also long-term health consequences there. And so what breakthroughs are you seeing there, and how can these grants help in those areas? I would start with Captain Nemec, but welcome you all, because Mr. Lipinski and I are also on the Science Committee, so very interested in how we can, and I've certainly seen this in my departments, the new technology and the real promise of both making safer communities but making life easier for our firefighters. I mean, it's never easy, but safer.
First and foremost, Madam Chair, I will say, through the education, through the prevention, and we have always taken the mantra in Fairfax County of preventing the 911 call. But how does that relate to the firefighters and paramedics in Fairfax County? Last week, several of my colleagues here met and were engaged and involved in a program called Wellness Fitness Initiative. And part of that program is doing just that, is looking at the wellness, looking at the prevention, and then should one of these firefighters or paramedics come down with a cancer, with cardiac disease, we want to set that standard so that that individual is able to, one, get back on the rig, and then to have the ability to have good quality life. So we are setting those standards. That, of course, is coupled with the equipment that we currently have. That's where, one, the safer, dealing with individuals, dealing with personnel, and then as far as the fire grant, dealing with things. And because of these items that in Fairfax County we have been able to get from the AFG, we've been able to do a lot of the prevention. And then if a firefighter is involved in an emergency situation, not only are we able to provide the training, but we have the necessary tools to ensure that that firefighter or firefighters gets out alive.
Right. And others? I'm particularly interested, of any sort of new devices that we might be able to, in the future, you could show us, and I'd like to be able to demonstrate to my colleagues as we're advocating the more need for this, the more things that we can put in your hands and technology in that way, because sometimes that's a very vivid way to demonstrate how you will, people can see how this will make your lives and your jobs safer.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairwoman Comstock, for the question. The first thing that I want to do is make sure that we recognize that a significant amount of information has been new to the fire service over the last couple of years since the research has come in. A lot of that has to do with the health of the firefighters. A significant doctrinal shift is ongoing right now in the fire service as it relates to transitional attacks, the way that we actually attack fires, because we now know, because of the research being done by Dr. Horn and NIST and NIOSH, that we're not pushing fire like we previously thought, that we can actually hit it defensively and then transition into an offensive attack where we go inside. Because once you knock the fire down from the outside and then transition to an interior attack, it is safe for the firefighters. Our modern home has been plasticized, and as those materials burn, they create these aromatic hydrocarbons that attach to the skin. In the video that you saw them wiping down, doing gross decon of the firefighters, and we know that 54% of those can be taken off the skin in the gross decon, but that means that 46% of that cancer-causing aromatics will still remain on the firefighter's skin. So relative to new technology, we just are beginning to see the governors opt in to FirstNet, which is the Public Safety Broadband Trust, and we will soon be having communications equipment that will be providing information to incident commanders, something like a ruggedized phone that has data streams and data elements. We should be able to have wearable technology whereby we will be able to find the X, Y, and Z coordinates for every firefighter that is on the scene. All of that is being done in cooperation with these types of grants, this type of information, and we're just right on the cusp of seeing a lot of things that are coming down the road in the next couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you. I see that I'm out of time, but I would invite any of you to share any of that information with the committee so that we can, as we're doing our job of advocating for these grants, really, draw that picture for our colleagues. Thank you. Now I recognize Mr. Lipinski.
Thank you. Captain Nemec, Dzień dobry, and I'm not going to push my Polish any more than that. Chief Brown, you had mentioned that you had said we should look in the eyes of our firefighters, first responders, and learn about what they're doing. And I want to thank all of you for, we are here to do that. We do that back in our home districts. I know I certainly do and appreciate the work that you do. And we are here to help you better do that work beyond the front line. I want to ask Dr. Horn about some things, more things that may be helpful to get this research out there to the front line. As you know, research and development is really a system of feedback loops between fundamental research, development, and then deployment. You discussed the research to practice needs and opportunities in your testimony. It also discussed the need for a dedicated pot of funding for applied research needs because agencies such as NSF and NIH primarily support basic research. Please elaborate on the need for the Fire Prevention and Safety Grant Program and how it helps in translating research to the standards and tools used in the fire service community, and what more can be done to translate research into practice, including through increased partnerships between researchers and firefighting organizations.
Well, Ranking Member. Thank you very much for that question. It's a very important question because the research dollars are are difficult to come by and need to be allocated in the most effective manner possible. The AFG, through the Fire Prevention Safety Research and Development grants, ties the fire service into the grants from the very beginning of the process. So I mentioned a series of needs analysis and research agenda that exist, and those are all put together by the fire service. Various different aspects of the fire ground are considered and focused on in each of those research agenda, but those drive the grants that are being funded by the Fire Prevention Safety Program. So the funding itself is actually driven by the needs of the fire service. And those needs are very often not focused on the applied aspect, getting some technology, getting some technique, informing policies, informing practices, much like Chief Sinclair just mentioned, informing practice based on science, looking at tactics based on scientific principles. These are things that aren't easily funded through National Science Foundation and NIH because it's a tactical priority. Yet we can now make our firefighters safer, help them to make better decisions by looking at the broader understanding of the tactics that we are using in order to address these problems. So the fire service is setting the priorities for each of these grants. And what's also very unique about this program is that the fire service sits at the table. The firefighters themselves are reviewing each of these grants compared to those priorities and indicating whether or not that is fundable from a firefighter-specific perspective, and it goes to a scientific review process. Few other grant programs have that dual role, dual bosses for that project. So the firefighters themselves will not get to the scientific review unless it does have some strong fire service review. And then throughout these projects, the research to practice avenue has been incredible because firefighters become parts of each of these projects. Advisory boards on all of these projects usually involve fire service from across the country, east to west, north to south, from firefighters to fire chiefs, and they help guide the programs. The Fire Protection Research Foundation does a great job for departments or for different agencies that don't have contacts or direct access to National Fire Service. They help put together an advisory board for those so that the data becomes vetted through that group before it goes out to the fire service themselves. So the fire service is involved in this program from start to finish, and as a result, it directly translates to standards. It directly translates to policies, and the increase and the change in some of the technologies that have been discussed, and we could talk about many more from Chairwoman Comstock's question, are being developed because of the research that has the fire service at the table from the very beginning.
Thank you. Very, very quickly, Dr. O'Neill, how does the Fire Administration make sure you're leveraging the relevant research work of other federal agencies such as DHS Science and Technology Directorate, NIST Engineering Lab, and the National Science Foundation?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Lipinski. We work very closely. We have staff that works with all of those different agencies. We more or less serve as technical experts. We give the information back to the fire and emergency services through our distribution outlets. And that's typically, they'll call us up all the time, and they'll give us an opportunity to participate. So we more or less serve as technical experts on whatever research is being done.
All right, thank you very much, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Okay, and I now recognize Mr. Banks.
Thank you, Chairwoman Comstock, for organizing today's hearing. And thanks to each of you for being here as well to testify before Congress about the importance of these grant programs as we debate the reauthorization of many of them. And also thanks for the hard work that you do to serve our local communities. Despite living in a time where fire prevention technology is more advanced than ever, it is unfortunate to hear that incidents of fire, property losses to fire, and deaths caused by fire are increasingly common. This month alone, the Fort Wayne Fire Department in my district has already logged roughly 73 fire-related incidents, ranging from passenger vehicle fires, cooking or equipment fires, and various smoke scares across Allen County, the largest county in the 3rd District of Indiana. Many of these incidents happen in the early hours of the morning when detection isn't as responsive. For example, had firefighters not immediately responded to an automated alarm at 2:22 a.m. last week, my district could have lost its historic public library in Auburn, Indiana. The quick cooperation of citizens, fire detection technologies, and law enforcement in the aftermath of this incident can find damage mainly to the first floor rather than the entire structure. Awareness of fire prevention practices and fire grant program funding protects and benefits just about every Hoosier in my district in some way, shape, or form. Reauthorizing these programs is crucial to keeping both people and property safe back home in Indiana, so I look forward to learning more about what priorities to consider moving forward from each of you. My first question is to Chief Browning. I received a letter last week from your colleague in my home state, Indiana Fire Marshal Jim Greason. He expresses support for your proposal to increase the funding allocation for fire prevention and safety in the Fire Act Grants Program. He cites, for example, that with one of these grants in the state of Indiana, he was able to purchase 1,200 smoke alarms for the deaf and hard of hearing. This seems like a worthwhile effort, but do states share the results of research and programs with other states to assure best practices and the effective use of funding? Is there a process to check if such efforts are successful in meeting the program goals of reducing fire deaths and injuries?
Yes, sir, and thank you for that question. He's absolutely correct, and I think the role of the state fire marshals are to partner with their local fire service and responders to provide programs just as that. We know early detection, as you stated, is one of the fundamental methods of getting people out of a building and providing free and clear and quick egress while firefighters are responding to suppress that fire. So programs such as early detection, such as education, such as research are exactly what the fire prevention and safety program does. And you'll see many successes across the country that are shared. You know, I could remember when the 9-volt battery smoke alarm first came out in the market. I was actually pretty young then, even though they've been out a long time. I can remember when it first came out on the market, and people didn't want them. They were scared. I remember testifying before the Louisiana legislature in 1991 to make that a requirement at the sale of homes because we knew people were dying before firefighters could get there. And it was the hardest thing in the world to pass. Today, if you don't have a smoke alarm in your home, you understand that that's just as important as all of the other necessities in your home. And what you're seeing now is the upgrade to the 10-year lithium battery sealed alarms, because now when firefighters go into homes and install these alarms, they know there's 10 years of protection, not nine months or 12 months of a 9-volt battery.
Very good. As a follow-up to Dr. Horn, you specifically state in your testimony that one of the most encouraging trends in the FP&S R&D programs is the high degree of collaboration among researchers investigating health and safety concerns among firefighters. Can you elaborate on how this collaboration takes place, and particularly how knowledge and research is shared on the state and local level?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. This is a multidisciplinary, basically a transdisciplinary research program that has developed as a result of the nearly 10 years of funding through the Fire Prevention Safety R&D programs. The studies such as the video that was displayed earlier have gone from a single topic to really trying to understand the fire service response in a holistic perspective, understanding that changes in protection from one aspect, such as increasing protection from the carcinogens, the chemicals on the fire ground, can have impacts on other aspects, such as increased heat stress and cardiovascular strain on the fire ground. So the studies, such as the one you saw there, includes individuals who have expertise in all of those areas, where we have cardiovascular research experts from New York, from UIC, as well as from Illinois, industrial hygienists who focus on chemical exposures from NIOSH, as well as Underwriter Labs, who has studied the fireground environment in a most complete manner possible. So this transdisciplinary group is necessary to be able to look at this from a higher level, to be able to understand the trade-offs in protection from one aspect to the other, and how we can minimize or optimize that trade-off there. And that has been an outgrowth, a direct outgrowth of this R&D program, which has brought firefighter-related research together in this one area.
Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Esty, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I want to thank our chairman and ranking member for this very important hearing we're having today. And I really want to thank the 6 of you for your service and what you represent for firefighters across the country. Chief Sinclair, as you noted, I've worked very closely with the firefighters in Connecticut, where we have 80% of our departments are staffed by volunteers. 80% of all our firefighters are volunteers. I have a lot of small rural communities, and they absolutely depend on these programs. They're completely vital A town of 4,000 or 3,000 people can't possibly afford to provide the protection for, as you say, Captain Nemick, and several of you have mentioned, somebody who got up in the middle of the night and puts their life on the line to save their neighbor. And we can't thank them enough. So first, thank you for all you do. I wanted to highlight again what Chief Sinclair noted about the utter importance of supporting through these grants volunteer recruitment and retainment. In Connecticut, we figured that saved us $18 million. One of my best staffers left me because his lifelong dream was to become a firefighter. But in Connecticut, he has to pay $1,000 for the training to even take the test. That's gone up substantially. So to even have the opportunity to take the test, young men and young women are having to pony up themselves, and that's just wrong. And these grants are vital to keeping our communities safe. I wanted to turn a moment, Dr. Horn, to something that you talked about, this being the Science Committee, and about the research, but I think a lot of times we think about fancy new equipment, and certainly the materials technology, and some of that research is actually being done in my district in Avon, Connecticut, provides some of the best reflective material that's used to keep firefighters safe around the country. But the importance of practices and techniques of training, again, because so many of our firefighters are volunteers. Can you talk a little bit more about the importance of that training that otherwise isn't getting done? And then what, if anything, we can do to disseminate that information? Because again, the best research in the world, if it stays in the can or is in a manual that nobody looks at, is not going to save the lives that we need to save so that they can go out and continue to save those of others. Again, thanks very much.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question, and an area that is a specific focus of this research and development program is getting information out to the fire service. But let me take a couple steps back and actually discuss something that was brought up by Chief Sinclair, and that is the practices. An avenue that we have really started to look at is understanding tactics, how the actions that we take on the fire ground can change the risk profile for the occupants of the structure as well as the victim. And some of these things are very tightly held tactics that have gone through many years, have worked successfully for those departments. So we need to understand the impact of changing a tactic, but the impact of changing a tactic in my department would be very different than in Fairfax County. So we need to provide information on what can be done and how that broadly translates across the country, because it has to be implemented locally. A department that has 2 members showing up is very different than a department that has 6 members and 5 more apparatus coming behind. So we're trying to provide information that can be broadly translated, but also is widely available, as well as generalizable to the different realities and the local jurisdictions. One of the great ways we've been able to do that is through the internet. A lot of online programming is freely available as a result of this project. The project you saw in the video, we're right now working on a toolkit that should be available by the end of the year, free for any department to get online, to have access to that information. What does it mean, the tactical considerations, the policy considerations, but then access all the way down to the actual scientific, academic, peer-reviewed data if they're interested in that. Most fire departments probably care about the how. So those tactics can have an impact. We often rely on our personal protective equipment and some tools to provide protection for us. But in many ways, if you look at from a hierarchy of controls, that should be one of the last levels that we're focusing on. If we can avoid that through engineering policy, that's what we're looking at. There are, though, to answer Chairwoman Comstock's question, there are technologies being funded by Fire Prevention Safety to look at things such as particulate measurements on the fire ground, because the tools that we have right now don't do a good enough job to tell us when it is safe to take off our SCBA, for instance. So it's coming, it's broad-based, and it's focused because of this type of program.
Again, my time is running out, but I want to say again how important this is, because again, especially our rural communities, but frankly, our cash-strapped cities, like mine in Waterbury, I reached out to my fire departments over the last couple of days, and every single one of them said they absolutely depend on these grants. They could not possibly staff their departments or provide the protective equipment that they need without this, especially when we see a lot of constrained state and local budgets. So having those resources at the federal level available to Americans across the country is incredibly important. And again, I want to thank the 6 of you for your service. Please thank your departments, and appreciate your help in helping us make that case to our colleagues so we get this reauthorized at a higher appropriate level, back to the levels it should have been at, to help keep Americans safe. Thanks all very much.
Dr. Marshall, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Hirsch, a couple questions. What are the most critical needs that we face in Northwest Kansas for your fire departments? What are your most critical needs?
Well, Congressman, clearly the awareness, the safety culture that has changed in the fire service from 1963, when my father started in the volunteer fire service, to 87, when I started, to 2017, has changed dramatically. And a lot of that has come because of the research projects that have been done. But I think we can never forget the fact that there are basic needs that are still not being met in rural fire departments out in our state. There are still departments that are borrowing gear from other departments. A department will replace their gear and transfer it to another department. Gear that probably should be out of service, but it's better than what they had. Departments that have 50 or 60-year-old trucks, departments that have 40-year-old hose, departments that don't have SCBAs to be able to do an aggressive interior fire attack to save lives. There are a lot of basic needs out there that still have not been met. There are departments in Kansas that still have dirt floors in their fire station. It's just a fact of life. And they're small departments. They don't have a very large tax base. These programs are just invaluable, and they're invaluable to saving volunteer firefighters' lives.
How would the USFA or the fire safety grant programs help with those types of needs?
Oh, well, clearly, at least in the northwest part of the state where I live, there are countless departments that have gotten grants to pay for that type of equipment. But I will tell you that over the past 10 to 15 years, the amount of money that's been appropriated into these programs has declined markedly. And so where a lot of departments in Kansas were getting grants 15 years ago, there aren't very many today because the competition is so stiff and the funding is so small.
Let's kind of follow up on the grant process. I assume that you're the person that writes these grants?
In my department, yes, and for a lot of my neighbors, too.
I would suppose. How is that process going, or what challenges do you have in the grant process writing?
The writing the grants are not difficult. I've also been on the other side and reviewed grants with the fire administration. It's made up of a peer process where firefighters actually get a chance to review grant applications from other departments. That also helps you write your own grants when it comes around too. But I'll tell you that a lot of these volunteer fire chiefs, they've got lives, they have jobs, and that becomes very difficult for them to commit the amount of time. The grant process, the application process, is not that difficult, but it does take some time. It takes a commitment of time. They're already committing a lot of time and, frankly, committing a lot of their money to protecting their communities, and it's difficult. It's difficult, and especially, I think, with the decrease in the funding over time, after you've applied for a grant a time or two or three and you're not awarded anything,
sure,
then you get discouraged and you give up.
Okay. I think my next question is for Dr. O'Neill. What is the USFA doing to specialize in training specifically for rural voluntary fire departments?
The specific training that we provide to rural departments, believe it or not, occurs at every state. So if we talk about your state, Kansas, the state fire training system there and the state director delivers National Fire Academy training throughout the state. I was out there last year. I spoke at a statewide conference, and they're just simply doing a terrific job. The advantage to those firefighters is that when they do that, they're registered in the National Fire Academy database, which means that their credential is carried wherever they go. If they move to a different department or even a different state, that credential carries with them. All the National Fire Academy courses are reviewed by the American Council on Education for college credit recommendation. They can transfer some of that credit into their college degree programs. And all of them also, well, the online courses that they're available are reviewed by the International Association of Continuing Education and Training, and they receive CEUs. So through the state training system and classroom training and through the National Fire Academy's online
But
learning.
what's unique, though, for the rural training? What is more specifically besides the process?
Okay. I'm going to ask to get back to you, and I'll give you a full list of the courses that we have available to you for the Rural Fire Service.
Mr. Hurst, maybe you can answer what what's more specific towards rural training.
Frankly, I don't know that there's a whole lot of difference between rural and urban firefighting. We have high rises, they're grain elevators. But we're still fighting house fires. We're still trying to extricate people from wrecks. We're still handling EMS calls and hazmat calls. The training is similar across those lines, whether you're rural, suburban, or metro.
Okay, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Marshall. Ms. Bonamici, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for holding this important hearing, and thank you to each and every one of you for being here today and for the important work you do. Like so many of my colleagues, I have been and continue to be a strong supporter of the Fire and Safer grant programs, and I know that numerous fire departments in the district I represent in Oregon, particularly the volunteer departments, rely on those funds to fulfill critical needs. The district I represent, Chief Sinclair might be familiar with it, is bordered by miles and miles and miles of the mighty Columbia River. And on Monday, just this past Monday, I had the opportunity to meet with the Maritime Fire and Safety Association, which is a wonderful collaborative organization with our neighbors to the north on the other side of the river. It was formed after the tragic death of a Coast Guardman and the critical injury of a firefighter after an inability to coordinate response to vessel fire on the Columbia River. And it is a fabulous collaboration, and it includes more than a dozen municipal fire agencies along the Willamette and Columbia Rivers. And many of those agencies have benefited from Fire and Safer grants. So it is a unique organization, and it is a serious issue that they need to be prepared for. There's a lot of vessel traffic in the river. So I wanted to quote Bob Livingston. He's the president of the Oregon State Firefighters Council, and he described these grants, the Fire and Safer grants, as some of the best federal programs, and they yield a great deal of success. And this is what he says. He said, the reason for this is twofold. First, whether it is vital equipment that may save a life in the event of a cardiac arrest, or having adequate staffing to handle the wide range of emergency response. These dollars are getting to the local level. Second, these dollars are allocated to local communities based on scientific-based information that allows congressional members to come together in a bipartisan fashion to fund these important programs that make communities across this nation safer. So I know he appreciates the grants, and I have too. Mr. Hirsch, I wanted to ask you, the SAFER program has helped career departments hire new and additional personnel to meet staffing safety standards, and it requires a percentage of funding to go to volunteer departments for recruitment and retention of volunteer firefighters. So in your written testimony, you describe a recruitment program in Staten, Oregon, which is not quite in my district, but they've had a lot of success in bringing on career and volunteer firefighters. So could you elaborate on the program and the extent to which the best practices that are developed are scalable and repeatable for other volunteer fire departments?
Yes, I think they are scalable and repeatable. In the particular one that you're talking about in Staten, they not only recruited people for their own fire department, but as a result of the work that they did there, they recruited firefighters for neighboring fire departments as well. I believe there was some 80 firefighters in their district, and I think around 30 in neighboring districts. The National Volunteer Fire Council currently has a program as a result of a grant through this program called Make Me a Firefighter. If you want to look at it, makemeafirefighter.org is the website. What that does is it sets up a portal for local fire departments to create their own resource there, so that if someone wants to volunteer for their department, there's a particular portal for that department that a person can sign up and see whether or not they need volunteers in that particular area.
Wonderful, thank you. And I want to get another question in. I know one of the proposals that's under consideration is to allow that the SAFER grant funds be used to augment the pay of part-time or paid on-call firefighters to make them full-time personnel. And I wonder if any of our witnesses could explain, do you support this? Do you share concerns that there might be about that change? Anybody want to weigh in on that proposal? I see Chief Sinclair is interested.
Thank you very much for the question. Many fire departments, mine as an example is a combination fire department. We have reserves residents, the reserves are paid on-call firefighters, we have career folks, and we have community volunteers. Many of our hires come from either our resident pool or our reserve firefighters, which are paid on-call firefighters. They are folks that are committed to the community, that are well-known to the community. They're well-known to us because we know their work ethic. And so having that pool of people that you can hire from is very appropriate. The conundrum in the current language is that because they're already a part-time employee, you can't hire them. Even though they're probably one of your most trusted resources, it would make a very good transition to a career position. And so that's the reason why we're asking for the change, is simply to be able to take people that are committed inside of that community, have already proven themselves to the organization, and the ability to transition. Many people that are in the career force came out of the volunteer or part-time ranks.
Right. Thank you. That's valuable input, and I see that my time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for being here, gentlemen. It's my time for some questions, and we appreciate your time away from your constituents. You are not only part of local security, fire security, but with global terror, now you're part of national security, and we understand the risks that you incur every time you enter a building of unknown substance. Chief Browning, thanks for being the fire marshal for my great state of Louisiana. You do an exemplary job, so kudos there. You deserve it. And my first question is to you. The state fire marshals are responsible and required to collect the fire data in their state for the U.S. Fire Administration. How does this affect my state of Louisiana's resources, and do you consider that an unfunded mandate?
Yes, sir. First off, I'm going to tell you, data collection is the most important thing. That's how we learn the testimony we give you today, not only in the prevention era, the need for equipment, and the need to hire additional personnel. It's that data that drives that. And that data starts at the local fire department. It comes to the state fire marshals. We collect that data, we scrub that data, and we report that to the U.S. Fire Administration. We receive no funds from the U.S. Fire Administration for doing that. It's a burden that my state budget, and I suspect other state fire marshal state budgets have to incur.
Okay. Some of the fire service groups feel that any changes to the fire grant authorization will have an effect on eliminating the sunset provision to take effect on January 2018. What is the state fire marshal's position on this?
Well, first off, we need to eliminate the sunset. It's not my opinion that proper changes and right changes and smart changes, certainly changes that bring about prevention, changes that bring about better expenditure of that equipment grant, and better changes that allow us to hire and retain firefighters shouldn't affect that sunset.
And you've alluded to this answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it in a little bit of a different way. You said in your testimony, I read it, that the most cost-effective way to protect the greatest number of individuals and property is to allocate additional funding for fire prevention and safety programs. How would additional funding for state fire marshal, fire prevention, and safety programs benefit fire departments in Louisiana, other states who do not provide fire prevention or have the resources to adequately enact fire prevention programs?
Well, I believe that allocating money to state programs puts a footprint in every community. So in our state of Louisiana, anything that the state fire marshal does, our state fire training center does, when they do that, it affects every fire department in our state, even the most rural that can't afford those resources, and even the largest and most progressive departments who we supplement the things that they do. So I think whether it's a smoke alarm campaign, whether it's a firefighter safety campaign, whether it's a training campaign, the state does do a good job of touching people who otherwise may be left out.
Thank you. Mr. LaHood, 5 minutes for you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me thank the witnesses for being here today, and thanks for your service to the communities that you serve throughout the country. Appreciate it very much, and for your valuable testimony here today. I want to add my support for the AFG grant program and the SAFER grant program. I've seen it throughout my district. I have a fairly rural district in central and west central Illinois, 19 counties that cover from Quincy, Illinois to Jacksonville, Illinois to Peoria and all places in between. And whether it's safety equipment, whether it's personnel, it has been a valuable program and has helped to protect the safety of the constituents there and also to help the many departments that are in my district. So we need to continue to support those programs. Dr. Horn, thank you for being here today. And the work that gets done at the Illinois Fire Service Institute is very important. And I've seen it in my state of Illinois. I served in the state legislature there and worked an awful lot with our local fire departments there. The work that goes on there, cross-cutting research, cardiovascular research, heat stress research, fire ground chemical exposure research, and the benefits that come about from that are applicable, whether it's rural or urban, throughout the state of Illinois. And I think it's really kind of a poster child for other areas across the country that can be done. What I guess I'm wondering, Dr. Horn, and I wanted you to comment on, is there, when we look at the federal level and whether there's any applicability on what we can do on the federal level based on what's done in Illinois, I was wondering if you could comment on that, on your thoughts.
Well, first of all, thanks for the kind words and the supportive comments. And so I'd just like a quick clarification. Are you asking what could be done to replicate some of the work that is potentially being done at Illinois Fire Service Institute? Well, we're very fortunate at IFSI in that we have the State Training Academy, which IFSI is, co-located with the University of Illinois, which is one of the leading Research One institutions in the country. And we have some very engaged individuals, both on the research side as well as on the fire service side, to try to come together and locate problems. There certainly are opportunities to replicate that at other locations. For instance, Maryland's State Academy is also at their state university. The important way that we can bring this forward is to make sure that we have the leadership that is willing to engage both sides and to understand the necessity that the fire service has for having this research translated to practice. It can be challenging for some academic research institutions, depending on how they are receiving tenure, promotion, those sorts of things, to potentially be engaged in some of this hands-on, more applied type of research as opposed to some of the more traditional funded research in those programs. So because we have the co-location of both of those, it allows us to do certain things like that, where we can touch both the academic side and the hands-on side. I believe this is when we talk about the Centers of Excellence. Centers of Excellence are actually now, we have people from across the country. The projects that we work with, NIOSH and Underwriter Labs and Skidmore College in New York, are a center that actually involves multiple different agencies that is being replicated. Phoenix, University of Arizona is developing a project that includes us as well as NIOSH, as well as Miami and other places. So the research is becoming, because of this R&D program, very transdisciplinary and across the country. So I believe it's starting to be replicated in various different areas. But the ability to translate it to the fire service, if Centers of Excellence were to be funded, that's one of the critical avenues, because that is a challenging aspect of all of this. Someone who can speak engineering or medical science and speak firefighter at the same time, because often those two don't overlap with each other, and that's a critical avenue where I think we have some unique ability to fill in that gap.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Horn. Those are all my questions.
Thank you. And my apologies to have to briefly leave. I have another hearing going on right now, a committee I served in, where the FBI building was an issue. So we've been wanting to get that in Virginia. I know my Maryland colleagues had other ideas. I think we all agreed we didn't want it in DC. So, but thank you all for your time and your expertise. We really appreciate all of your testimony and the members for their questions. I think, as you can see from today's hearing, we are all united in our interest in continuing the good work that you have on here and that you've done here, and we appreciate all you are doing in our respective communities and for the country. So the record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional written comments and written questions from members. And I'll also reiterate any of the different technology items and things that you would like us to highlight, and any visuals that we can highlight for our colleagues that will be very helpful as we go forward with our September 30th deadline that we want to make sure we meet to continue the good work you're doing. So the hearing is now adjourned.